My name is Pam Haji. I'm a professor here at Bergen Community College in English, and in fact, Ellen Feig is my office mate. I sit right across the desk from her, and I want to thank her for putting this together today. It's really exciting to have TED here at a community college. Thank you, Ellen. So I'm kind of revisiting my dissertation that was written 20 years ago, what I called Resistance Memoirs. It's autobiographies written by people who were involved in resistance political activities. And this was 1993 at the University of Arizona. And I found that there were several categories, or at least I grouped them into categories: self-determination struggles, memoirs from political prison, and memoirs of participation in revolutionary activities, including what we would now call terrorist activities. So I was looking for patterns in the texts, and I found them. And I'd like to share with you the patterns I found in the self-determination memoirs as a way of posing a question about resistance political activity today. If you've ever read the autobiography of Malcolm X, you'll remember this iconic text as a classic memoir of political resistance activity. Of course, Alex Haley had the final say about this narrative, but even so, I'd like to focus on the way the life story is organized, the sort of arc of development. Malcolm tells the story of his life as a before and after narrative, before his conversion to Islam and after, with his prison experience as the threshold that divides the two. The pattern I found was that his language and imagery are sort of formulated around a dichotomy of purity versus filth. Before prison, before his education, he refers to his life as filthy, made filthy by the white man's oppression. He was a druggie, a chaser after of white women, a petty criminal, a liar, a con artist, all of which he defines as a life of filth. Even the chapter where he puts himself through excruciating pain in order to be like the white man by conking his hair is treated by him as the sort of typical before picture, the dirty Malcolm before his purification. After prison, he becomes purified by ridding himself of the behaviors and the mindset of an oppressed man. Only then is he worthy of the freedom he will give his life to fight for. I also found a similar pattern going on in the memoirs of Mohandas K. Gandhi. His autobiography is interestingly subtitled My Experiments with Truth. It was written in 1927, which is a good long while before the Indian independence. So he was quite young, and he hadn't really become the Gandhi that we are familiar with, the legend. But his narrative's arc of development also features a kind of before and after picture. Before, he is the ridiculous top hat wearing, three-piece Western suit wearing barrister trained in England to uphold proper English virtues, like making the coolies work themselves to death in the service of the great British Empire. He feels that there are several areas in his life that require purification. He needs to cleanse himself of any Western notions of how to dress and eat. He had actually learned to be a meat eater in England, so he cured himself of this, and he also tried desperately to rid himself of sexual desire, a recurring theme throughout his memoirs. But he also advocated rejection of some of his own culture's practices. He hated the caste system, rejected it outright, and he was very keen on reforming the Hindus. The way he puts it is their lack of education and hygiene. So again, we have this pattern of purification versus dirt. And the metaphor of ritual purification, I think these two men used this as a way to illustrate their own metamorphosis from regular guy to political activist. The purpose of purification, according to them, is to achieve an overall self that is worthy of selfhood. Now, I want to go back in history a little bit to a much older story of political resistance, one that is not an individual story, but rather tribal It's the story of Exodus, the escape of the Jews from Egyptian slavery. Another really iconic text. The narrative portrays the Jews' struggle to be released from bondage. It took nothing less than the killing of every Egyptian firstborn child in order to finally get the Pharaoh to set Moses' people free, as you recall. And then, at that point, the journey had only just begun. The Jews must cross an important threshold, the river that famously parted in order to let the people through. And then, even then, it's still not over. There's still 40 years of wandering in the desert before the people are allowed to settle. Why is this? I think the 40 years issue is one of the most interesting issues in the book of Exodus. Why 40 years? Well, some Judaic scholars sort of infer that 30 years is about a generation. So 40 years is definitely a generation and then some. And perhaps it is important that all of the previous generation that had been enslaved will not live in the new land. There should not be one single memory of slavery, one single mindset, one single behavior from slavery allowed in the new land. It's a theory. I happen to like it a lot, including Moses himself. He would not be allowed to live in the new land, as you recall. So here's another self-determination memoir with before and after story and a high-profile leader who puts himself through ritual purification in order to be a leader. Indeed, here is what we might call the archetypal story of political resistance. And according to this and subsequent stories, it is leadership that is essential for a political movement to succeed. So I'm thinking that it's our stories that convince us that leadership is essential. Our familiarity with the previous narratives of political resistance is what guides future political resistance. Okay? Well, of course, Joseph Campbell. And I love the whole Joseph Campbell thing that says it's through our stories that we learn how to understand our past and how to live and how to imagine a future. I love thinking that humans will always pass down stories in order to keep them alive. But I have to admit, I find this way of thinking very romantic with a capital R, especially as we move into a world where the making and receiving of stories is changing, becoming more and more fragmented. And since I teach English, it is a thought that I carry with me every day, reading and writing stories. So I thought I would kind of update my thinking on political resistance by looking at, it's a small example, I admit, but it's the Occupy movement that happened last year. And see if there's anything that is the same or different. And the first thing I noticed about the Occupy movement was that it was deliberately leaderless. You could go online and search and try to find some particular go-to person. They were very keen on leaving that out. There was no person. So this is a classic kind of anarchist approach to political activism. There was a deliberate avoidance of any one leader who would, rise and become larger than life. So then I'm wondering if you can have political change without high-profile leaders. And, in the rejection of the hierarchy, top leader, his or her right-hand man or woman, is there a rejection of history? Is there a rejection of the romantic notion of the great leader and the great before and after story? Is there a rejection of heroes? Where does this leave our previous heroic stories of self-determination? Where does this leave Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X? Where are they? I can sympathize, of course, with rejecting one high-profile leader. It's certainly a common theme in the history of resistance for a so-called leader to vouch for égalité and fraternité and then crown himself king. It seems for every radical leader of a movement, there's a tyrant waiting to just pop out of the box. So as I watch political resistance today, such as it is with its tiny movements of marginal people or whack jobs intent on bombing their way to social change, my question is, what is the role of story now? Do the old stories of political resistance still resonate? Do we really need to know history or we are doomed to repeat it? How do we know this? From stories? Maybe stories are no longer relevant, or at least should be taken with a grain of salt. Maybe we can have political activism without leaders. Maybe we can envision a future without relying on stories. And maybe we can change the world without having to ritually purify ourselves. Maybe the whole purity-filth dichotomy is in the process of being rejected outright. And is this a bad thing, or is it a good thing? I don't know. Thank you.